Okay, hello and welcome everyone to this Legal 500 online roundtable alongside our partners Bear and Cara, titled The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic and Its Effects on Switzerland. My name is Joe Boswell. I'm a senior member of the Legal 500's in-house legal research team, and I've had the pleasure in the past of working on such projects as the GC Powerlist Switzerland. So it's good to see some of our previous inductees here today. I'll talk just briefly about the format today. We're going to speak for about 90 minutes on 4 topics, taking between 15 and 20 minutes for each one. And Urs or Aurélie will provide a quick introduction at the start of each of these, and then we'll throw it over to the floor and you can all get your opinions in. In order, these subjects are the opinions on the available legal framework for protecting business, the changing roles of GCs in managing risk, how the day-to-day working landscape has changed because of COVID-19, and then finally, on a more positive note, strategies to thrive going into the future. I would encourage all of you to speak up as and when you feel the need. We're trying to get a bit of a back and forth going, so just make yourself heard and we'll throw over to you. A quick note to say that we are being recorded. Yeah, so just bear that in mind. Don't say anything too naughty. Okay, I suppose we'll go around and introduce everyone now. Urs, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for introducing. So my name is Urs Kegi. I'm partner with Bear and Cara, working in the practice areas corporate, M&A, and capital markets, with a certain focus on listed companies. I'm a partner since 2014. Yes, I'm very happy to join this session. Would like to pass on my partner Aurélie.
Thanks, Urs and Joe. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aurélie Conradahi, and I'm also a partner with Bear and Cara in Geneva, where I'm basically heading the litigation practice, so dealing with commercial and banking disputes in a wide range of topics and different businesses.
Baz, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? You're on mute there.
I'm Gopal Basra. Hi, everyone. I think most of you communicated with me during this process of organising this roundtable. So nice to finally meet you all, albeit virtually. I head up the GC Powerlist for Legal 500. I've been there for about 7 years. Glad to say that we've managed to launch this now in something like about 80 different locations, I think, right, Joe? So a huge success. And I think Switzerland was indeed one of the very first that we launched. So interesting to hear what you've got to say today. This is part of a series of roundtables that we're doing in other European countries. We've just, I think Joe might have mentioned in his introduction, I'm not sure, that we participated in one for the Greek market on Friday, and we have another one in Italy next week. So it'll be interesting to see our opinions kind of differ between the different countries. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Oliver?
Yep. Yes, sure. Yes. So hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Kirchner, and I'm heading the EMEA legal team of Citrix, right? So I'm based here in Schaffhausen in Switzerland, and heading a small legal team. So 2 lawyers in London, 2 in Paris, 2 other lawyers with me in Switzerland, and actually hiring 1 paralegal here in Switzerland and 1 lawyer in London at the moment.
Miral?
Hi, everyone. This is Miral Amani Saman. I am based in Geneva. I am the Associate General Counsel in M&A and Corporate for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So I lead the EMEA M&A practice, as well as everything that relates to corporate restructurings, international governance, as well as bankruptcy and insolvency, which obviously at the moment is a topic that is in everyone's mind. So I lead a team of 4, being based in Geneva and London. Thank you.
Daniel?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for arranging this. I look forward to really fruitful discussion. I'm Daniel Cantor, and I am Chief Competition Counsel for the International Air Transport Association. I split my time ordinarily between Montreal and Geneva, but because of what we've all experienced over the past 10 or 11 months, I've actually not been able to go to Geneva. I'm not able to go anywhere at the moment. So I'm in our house in Montreal. Just in terms of my day-to-day, I focus on establishing antitrust policy for the aviation industry. The list is long in terms of what that encompasses, but I think we have some interesting discussion points today where at least some of these issues will come into play.
Lionel?
Good afternoon. My name is Lionel Constantin. I'm working with Japan Tobacco, heading the legal team in charge of the travel retail activities of Japan Tobacco worldwide. We've been heavily impacted, obviously, this year with all the airport and the travel bans and so on. Yeah, COVID was a tough year, 2020, and 2021 doesn't look that great. Small team of 5. We are 4 in Geneva and 1 person based in Singapore. That's it.
Andreas?
AG, which is a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and I'm also heading Lonza's global coronavirus task force.
And Nick, finally.
Hi, I'm Nick Raymond. I'm the General Counsel for Corporate Centre and Group Functions at Swiss Re. So obviously an industry which has been significantly impacted by the pandemic as well. The team is global at the moment. It tends to fluctuate in size, but at the moment it's around 30 people. We deal with all strategic M&A for the whole of Swiss Re across the business units. We deal with all of the capital markets and asset management work, which includes insurance-linked securitization. We do all of the treasury type work for our own balance sheet, as well as managing topics like disclosure and the competition framework on the legal side for the group. So it's many of those different aspects of have been impacted in some way or form.
Cool. That's everyone, I believe. So I'll throw over to Urs, who I believe is going to lead us through the first topic. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So the first topic is on how effective the available legal framework is in protecting businesses from the effects of COVID-19. So in Switzerland, as you know, the Federal Council declared the extraordinary situation, the außerordentliche Lage, on the 16th of March 2020, and also sweeping regulations followed quite quickly. So first, these regulations focused on restrictions to limit the spread of the pandemic and heavily impacted various industries themselves. And then more in the second wave, also measures trying to help or protect businesses in several ways, or at least to mitigate some of the effects of the previous regulations were then enacted. that included, just to remember, so that an extension of short-time working compensation. Then I think, which was quite successful, was at least for smaller businesses especially, was the possibility to get governmental guaranteed credits, so these COVID-19 plus credits. There was also in Switzerland a stay on the duty to file for bankruptcy, which lasted until October last year. There were some subsidies for certain industries, but more targeted to small businesses. Then there was a temporary stay on enforcement proceedings, and also other measures like at least convenient for the corporate practitioners. Also, it was a small measure. For example, the possibility to hold AGMs without shareholders. So in the meantime, we have again only the special situation, the besondere Lage, not the extraordinary situation anymore. And in the meantime, also Parliament has enacted a COVID-19 bill, which provides the legal basis for several measures. Some of the initial measures are not in place anymore. Already mentioned, for example, the duty to file for bankruptcy. And other measures were discussed but never entered into force or have never been implemented, such as relief for rent agreements, for example. On the other hand, I think we already heard it a little bit. I think different industries were impacted by the pandemic in very different ways, and clients with other clients made use of these tools very differently from each other. And we would certainly be interested in hearing from you what your experience was, whether you used any of those measures. And apart from the governmental measures, the pandemic also tested the existing contractual framework of many of our clients. For example, we have seen M&A contracts signed, but which needed to be revisited, and remedies have been explored at least, including whether one could call material adverse change or event clauses or ordinary course of business covenants. Of course, in a private law setup, the protection for one part is always then to the, or most frequently is to the disadvantage of the other party. So this is maybe a little bit one-sided, but there were also quite a couple of learnings on that. I think that's also an interesting topic if you have any experiences. But now I would like to open the floor, and maybe we can start with experience with the use of governmental measures. Does anybody volunteer to start? Maybe somebody from a more affected industry. I think we heard, for example, Lionel before.
Yes, but we haven't used any of these government measures in terms of employees or reduction of working time. We haven't done anything, and there's been no termination of employment. We are a market duty-free, and we have the support of a large group. So obviously they are behind us, and I guess for a year or two they will swallow it. If it becomes a permanent rebase on the travel retail, because business will travel less because they realize that Zoom calls, Skype, Teams works as well as business trips, as save times and money, maybe we will have to rebase as well our headcount. But for now, no credits, no nothing. We were more exposed to the fact that our products are aging. So you produce your cigarette, for example, you have 6-12 months to sell them. If the airports are closed and you cannot sell anything, or you have, I don't know, 10,000 people in Geneva airport instead of 100,000, then you are left with some stock that you have to buy back from retailers. So there is a financial impact, but being a large corporation, we haven't used any of the credit or measures of the Swiss government.
I think one of the
sorry,
things
I was just going to, no, go ahead, actually, sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, just picking up on that, obviously, depending on the size of the company that you work for and the industry that you work in, there's clearly a reputational angle to this as well. So it's not just a legal and regulatory issue in a sense. So, and I think one of the things that people had to take into consideration in Switzerland is how optically it looks if, you know, if a company like Swiss Re were to avail themselves of the measures that are primarily there to help medium to small size businesses, particularly in a highly regulated environment when it was clear that there could at some stage be regulatory pressure in and around discussions, for example, on the payment of dividends, which we saw in other countries, for example. So I think there's a lot of things to think about when you consider these types of measures.
Yep. Operating in tobacco, there was even a bigger reputational risk if you start to ask money from the government or helps. So I guess for us it was no question.
Yeah, it's like I agree, right? So I mean, first of all, nobody will be surprised that we as Citrix didn't make use of any programs, right? I mean, we benefited of that situation. I mean, Citrix providing solutions for secure remote work. Our business was actually booming in 2020. So obviously we didn't make use of anything. Actually, we took even the opposite approach, right? I mean, you may know, in addition to the federal measures, some cantons also had measures, for example, to help non-profit organization, cultural initiatives, sports initiatives, and so on. And we as a company increased our donation budgets, and then we also reached out to the canton and said, hey, if you hear of some institutions, non-profit organizations, or whatever it is, who are in need of help and who don't fit into the public patterns, please let us know so that there is something how we can help, right? And actually similar on the product side, we did not increase prices last year. We probably could have, because our customers were in urgent needs of our solution. We actually did the opposite and ran some special promotions, helping also companies how to send their people home, allowing work from home. And again, in particular, in the nonprofit area and in the healthcare sector, we had some promotions and offered highly discounted licenses and cloud services there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just going to say, there's been a lot of talk about a K-shaped economy. Most of the time that is put in the context of people. So particularly those in service type of employment, hotels, restaurant, etc., that are really bearing the brunt of the pandemic. What's clear in the conversation that we're having now is that is happening within the business as well. So while some companies have benefited tremendously, particularly in the tech sector over the past 10 months, as we've all transitioned to a work from home type of an environment, those that depend on travel, for example. I mean, the airline industry, similar to Lionel, is just in a, probably even more so because the airline industry doesn't have the financial backing necessarily. And so certainly within the airline industry, it's an existential crisis. If we look just at a macro level at the forms of government aid that has been dumped into the sector over the past 10 months, we're looking at $200 billion. $200 billion is really nothing more than a Band-Aid in terms of what will be required over time. Our chief economist at IATA is not expecting traffic volumes to get back to 2019 levels until 2024. And as such, there is going to have to be a substantial amount of aid, a continuous aid from governments to really keep the airlines flying. This will affect not only us as consumers of travel in terms of business and leisure travel, but it also has much broader implications because there's less supply, there are less aircraft flying around. International traffic was down 88% in the last year. What that does on the other side of the equation, of course, when in terms of freight, in terms of cargo, is that cargo rates for all of you who are transporting cargo around the world has shot up exponentially. I don't know what the figure is, but we're talking a pretty high double-digit increase in cargo rates. And so this is going to have to be really a world effort in terms of the solidarity required for the folks down on the lower end of the K, whether you're talking about businesses or people suffering in their personal capacity. So I don't want to be an alarmist, but certainly from the perspective of the airline industry, things are quite dire.
I was going to ask someone, I can't remember who it was in the introduction, but they said they were dealing with new insolvency legislation. Was that you, Morale?
Yeah, I was going to
I'd be
jump in,
interested to hear about that.
Yeah, no, so actually stepping back a little bit and commenting a little bit like Citrix did, HPE, while being a tech company, we actually were impacted because of supply chain. So definitely in terms of supply chain, getting our servers go where they are supposed to go at our customers' premises, actually this wasn't as easy as you imagine. So we were actually impacted, and there were temporary measures taken at worldwide level, not only Switzerland, where salaries were cut, including our CEO, which took a hit of 25%, really to be the model. We were not as hit as that, but definitely the CEO was kind of playing the game, and we were impacted. There was a temporary measure, so we're not affected, but definitely we had to ensure that actually no employees would be terminated and so on and so forth. So so in that sense, we made the effort together just to safeguard everyone. So yeah, no, in terms of bankruptcy and insolvency, I'm actually looking more at the US market and Chapter 11 proceedings. And I was going to ask Urs if he saw actually an increase in Switzerland, which I actually don't believe. But from a US perspective, they were not so much an increasing number of Chapter 11 compared to what we know, but an increase depending on the industry you belong to. So we saw an increasing number in retail industry. So Neiman Marcus, if people know about those commercial centers, clothing, Century 21, I mean, those companies like that were affected, and they are going through Chapter 11 proceedings as we speak. You have also Hertz, the company that leases the cars, is undergoing Chapter 11 as we speak. So depending on the industry you belong, you would definitely be affected by insolvency. As of today, and to probably bounce back on the question you asked, we haven't seen like the boom in insolvencies, at least not yet. Government aids are still on. Companies are still benefiting from loans. Obviously, in some time, aids will not be there anymore. Companies will be in a position where they have to pay back their debt. And this is probably the moment where we're expecting, I hope not, but we're expecting probably an increase in those kinds of proceedings. And actually to continue on that point in that discussion, I don't think in Switzerland you've seen so many increases in, you have the same kind of Chapter 11 proceedings that allow a company to breathe and restructure in case it has financial difficulties. But what's your view on actually that? Sorry to be moderating, but I really had that question too.
Oh, of course. No, thanks for that. No, I think we have in principle these proceedings, but it's unfortunately it's very badly drafted, which means in Switzerland, if you go into that proceeding, at least the general expectation is really then your companies goes bankrupt in the end.
But you haven't seen an increase, right?
So we haven't seen an increase in that, especially because it's really, if you go there, you do this as the last resort instead of bankruptcy filing, and not as a protection. There was an interim measure, but this was only designed for small companies, so where you could have the special COVID-19 stay, but also that we haven't really seen much. I think people, the first place, didn't know, and second, it was really designed for small companies where you would get the temporary stay. But also there, so the message to do this was usually seen as very bad. What we have seen on the other hand is we have seen some pre-court, so out-of-court restructurings. So where you always have in the background, you have the scenario that you can go into bankruptcy, but you try to do a voluntary restructuring. And we've seen that a couple of them during the last months. So that's something we've seen. But yeah, fortunately, they all ended well, so we didn't have to file for bankruptcy, at least.
What we've done from a commercial perspective is actually agree, especially when it comes to our leasing business, like payment terms, more longer payment terms to allow customers to improve their cash flow, so that we can ensure that our cash flow is not necessarily impacted, at least in the long run. So that's definitely one of the measures we took, but it wasn't necessarily, again, on the basic question, using the Swiss governmental measures.
Just a quick additional point, if I may, Miral, on what you just said, and Urs, to comment on the statistics as to bankruptcy in Switzerland. I think they were clearly confirming what you've just said. So basically, bankruptcies in Switzerland in 2020 went actually clearly down. And it was also a surprise for the courts, at least in Geneva. The courts had been prepared to see an increase, but it did not happen. And I think that the causes you highlighted, Miral, are exactly right. So basically, during this last year, the companies have been under perfusion, so to say, with the credits, COVID-19, but also the postponement of bankruptcy, which had been allowed during spring. And obviously, this is certainly not during 2020 that we would see the effect or the negative impact of all of that, but maybe it's going to start in 2029. This is actually what is expected from the tribunals, at least in Geneva, for this year. And we might start seeing that quite seriously in certain business areas, obviously thinking about the restaurants and all the business fields around them, as some of them have now been closed for nearly 6 months, and very likely we will start seeing the impact there.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because the talking of the kind of overall effects and then going back to the reputation as well. So, you know, if you look at insurance for default, for example, we have a business which deals with that, and that's obviously very closely linked with what you've just been discussing in and around the insolvency piece, right through to, for example, on the other side of the balance sheet where you've got commercial real estate, for example, or even private real estate where you've got tenants that are struggling as well in an individual capacity, or and then you have the same sort of issues that you have to think about as to, well, you're running a business, but at the same time there's a reputational angle to, you know, calling defaults on people for failure to pay rent during a pandemic or whatever it might be. So there's the knock-on effects of the initial question are quite broad in our world as well.
I was just going to say we should probably move on to the next topic now if we want to stay on time.
Yeah, so the next topics we'll be discussing about the strategies to survive and thrive during the pandemic and after the crisis of COVID-19. So obviously that's a very broad topic. I think during the past 10 or 11 months, we've all had to experiment new strategies and to adapt to a complete new world in terms of management within the team. So our own team management, but also our family management, probably for most of us, and how to be able to deal with a complete and brand new work organization internally, but externally as well, working from home, but also adapting to brand new business needs. And obviously, that is probably particularly true for some of you, depending on the practices in which you are dealing with. We might obviously assume that for those of you working in the airline industry, in the insurance, or in the tech industry, but also obviously in the pharmaceutical industry, and especially you, Andreas, the impact must have been quite huge in a positive way for you at Lonza, in a more negative way for those of you dealing with the airlines industry. And we would be interested to hear your views as to the strategies you've been able to implement, both on your internal organizational aspects within your team. How did you manage to keep in touch, to catch up with your team members while all working remotely? But also within your organization, because obviously in your position, you're not only dealing with your own team, but also with the key people in your organization. That being also, we assume, more complicated while all being at home, and especially at a time when we have to deal with particular business needs and in a crisis management, to speak clearly. So happy to hear your views and get your tips. We are not expecting that any of you has the absolute solution. Otherwise, please share it. We will all be happy, but at least to possibly share some tips and explain to us how you went through that and what are your expectations maybe as well.
Right. So thank you, Aurélie, for pointing out the question. Talking from the perspective of a pharmaceutical manufacturer, like this COVID crisis or COVID situation for us has been obviously in a particular situation. I mean, it first started out sometime, and I remember it was more or less exactly 1 year ago, where we kind of realized that something was going on, which was kind of unprecedented, not just a local Chinese event. And then we quickly put in place a global task force to deal with it. And because our business is deemed to be a so-called essential business by regulators, our task really has been to maintain business continuity, to make sure that everyone kind of can continue working, can continue fulfilling the tasks, and can continue to basically provide the public with the goods that are most needed. So we obviously, it was a kind of, in the beginning it was a situation of constant firefighting. I remember in the very beginning where some cantons in Switzerland were running out of sanitizers. So the hospitals didn't have any means to kind of protect their own employees, and so they were reaching out to us, and we immediately had to kind of on the production side to kind of start thinking about how can we provide sanitizers, which is something we ordinarily don't really do, but we have the means to do it. Then obviously the question comes, well, what's the legal ramifications? How do we deal with that situation? Do we incur a risk? I think we all had these questions coming all one after the other, and we had to deal with it on an ongoing basis. I think when I also circle back to the question of what's the legal framework, what's the impact on us in the situation, and what's the biggest concerns. Our biggest concerns has actually not been the lack of activity by governments and legislators and the lack of activity by those who create rules, but quite the other way around, right? So we found, all of us, I think everyone here in the room, has been pretty well equipped to deal with the situation as it developed, and we all dealt with it. And I would say the safest place to be during the pandemic has been actually on the site in our facilities. Now, our biggest problem has always been when states, governments on all levels started creating rules, like started seizing face masks at the borders, started kind of regulating the flow of raw materials. Now, most currently, a few days ago, some states felt it a good idea to start regulating the flow of vaccines and under which circumstances they may keep vaccines back at the border. And these are the situations which not only are extremely unhelpful if you want to fight the pandemic, but also create a lot of work for all of us in the legal department, because you have to unseize the face masks, you have to make sure that the vaccines or the kind of the raw materials can still flow. So when we dealt with it, we always kind of tried to be one step ahead of the virus. So we learned from China, the experience we had in our operations in China, we learned for the benefit of our operations in Singapore. When then the virus hit Singapore, we learned from Singapore for the benefit of our European locations. And when it hit Europe, we learned and kind of took the benefit for our operations in the US. And similarly on the legal side, obviously kind of came early March, we started putting in place all the contingency plans for work from home, so that when actually we had to go on out of the office and work from home, we had the IT in place and we all had all the measures in place. But I think from a team perspective, I think the biggest task still is the dealing with the uncertainty. I think we started a year ago. We didn't have any clue how it would further develop. Like we saw the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns. So we started kind of planning in certain scenarios. So what if? Also on the legal side, so what if the pandemic continues for months, which it has? How do we deal with it? How do we make sure that even though we have all these video connections, some of maybe the weakest people in the teams or the people who need the biggest support will not be the ones who shout when they are on the screen? So how do we find out how people are actually kind of feeling when they're at home, just working in the small compound of their own apartment? So all of these kind of leadership questions have been untested so far, and I think there were many good ideas. Some worked better, some worked less, but I think in the end it was all about leading and all about kind of being with the team and with with our employees to make sure that they get all the support they need.
While you're speaking, Andreas, maybe you can tell us a word as well as to, I mean, your business, especially at Lonza, has been booming since last year, and you had to adapt basically your facilities and your manufacturing lines and so on. How did you deal with that in the legal department? How did you manage to address that in a very short time frame, basically?
Well, I mean, extreme flexibility is the answer to the challenges. We had extreme flexibility from our engineers and everyone who we basically just kind of like what usually would take years to come up with a vaccine and then let alone to manufacture it now takes place in a couple of months, and that's just the result of innovation on the science side, but also huge flexibility by everyone, and that flexibility needs to be mirrored by the legal department, obviously, because you're no longer kind of just an advisor. You're totally part of the entire team that solves an issue by working 7 times 24, by providing the input, by saying, hey, this is fine, go ahead, but this we cannot do. Let's just kind of let's look at it. So a high amount of flexibility, a high amount of kind of risk-based approach. So what is key in the current situation and what can we deal with later? And then I think ultimately it's the time where you see the difference in the people. So you'll see people who step up and who take the chance and who actually outperform as they've never done before. And then there's other people who continue doing their job, and then kind of allowing also here the flexibility that those who actually go the extra mile, take the extra step and outperform, that you basically give them tasks and let them run with it, I think is key in that situation.
Maybe Daniel, do you want to follow up to give us the other side of the extreme of the crisis in your business practice and also leading with a team completely remotely?
Yeah, I mean, starting with the sort of day-to-day work internally within IATA, it's been surprisingly simple. Through the use of technology. We are a business, as you might expect, that over the last 75 years, whenever there's been a meeting, that meeting almost invariably has been in person, together with our 300 or so airline members. So we have transitioned not only to these types of meetings that we are having here today on an internal basis, but all of our, for example, conferences where typically thousands of people would join somewhere in the world to discuss various issues, those too have moved online. Obviously, it's cumbersome to sit in front of a screen for a full 8 hours, so you tend to split that up. By having maybe 2 or 3 meetings, or having the same meeting over 2 or 3 days as opposed to 1 day. All of our board meetings have gone virtual, and I have to say, you know, between that and internal collaboration, the sort of day-to-day communication, I think, has actually improved as a result, and it's something positive to take away for a post-COVID world. We've just like the airlines, IATA has gone through restructuring on a worldwide basis. We've let go of approximately 25 to 30%. The employment laws in trying to implement something like this on a worldwide basis is highly complex. In Switzerland, you have a consultation process that you have to go through, engage the employees. That's going to look very different in various countries in Europe. Switzerland is very different from Spain, which is very different from Germany, not to mention the rest of the world. So that was a big challenge to get from sort of start to completion. In terms of one of the issues that I'm thinking about at the moment is how to leverage all of the IATA airlines to ensure that vaccine distribution comes across not only in the developed countries, but more importantly in the emerging countries. And so we've seen a call for collaboration and contribution from our membership in partnership with the WHO and the broader United Nations, such that even where airplanes today do not fly, you will be able to get vaccines to various countries in Africa or in Asia, obviously once they become available, but at least the transportation needs are there to ensure that those who need the vaccine get the vaccine. One question that I have for the group, and which I don't have the answer to internally, but that is what to do with your own employees, particularly those employees who do not wish to take the vaccine, and what the strategies are within your respective organizations in Switzerland and beyond to really come to terms with that. I don't have the answer, and I suspect that the answer will differ quite substantially by jurisdiction. But I'm interested in your views if you've given this some thought.
Yeah, very good point. And maybe also to know whether any of you has already taken any policy in respect of the vaccine policy that they will implement within their organization.
No, absolutely not, actually. As far as the HPE is concerned, I'm the daughter of a doctor, so I'm definitely into vaccines. And it's funny, Danielle, what you're saying is because I haven't actually thought about it when it comes to my team members. Funnily enough, I would think that nobody would be reluctant, but I would let them come. I would let them come to me, and I'm sure that they would be happy to eventually launch the discussion. And because I actually would understand why you would be fearing something that has just come up, that has had no kind of test before, but it would be the case for any kind of vaccine, and for as many years as it takes to have the AIDS. I mean, it was interesting this year because AIDS vaccine was used and someone actually got it, and I don't know if anyone heard about it, and it came like a small news in this whole COVID situation. And it's 10, if not, I don't know how many years we've been working on that one. And it's almost the same kind of consequence. I mean, it is a first test, and you don't know exactly what is going to be the impact on human beings when it comes to large use of this vaccine. So in a sense, the capacity of a company to do it quick does not necessarily, it may or may not, we're lawyers, right? It may or may not actually show of its good or bad effect. So it's going to be, it is an interesting question. So I don't have the answer either, but it's definitely something that if I'm being asked, I would kind of comment positively around the vaccine. But it would be my personal view, and my own responsibility would be at stake here.
We do have to move on quite quickly, but I think that's quite an interesting question. So maybe if anyone else had any thoughts on that, I'd like to speak up quickly before we move on?
I think in Switzerland, the government can force the population to take the vaccine. There's a lone epidemics. Certainly Urs knows this much better than me. That's recollection from university. But I haven't heard anything about that. And I would be very surprised that corporation will force their employee to take the vaccine before going back to work. It might be a requirement maybe to travel. Some airlines might ask for that. But companies, it seems a bit strange. I think people will wear the mask and keep the distance, if not working from home.
I agree.
It's sensitive.
Maybe I think in Switzerland we are still insofar not at this stage yet, because I think we have the opposite situation. So the people who want to get vaccinated cannot be vaccinated, as I think in most parts of the world. You're right, but on the duty in theory, but I mean, it's clearly has been excluded by the government that they will apply it. I think the only thing where it's potentially in discussion will be, but not at this stage, but maybe in some months to come, in the health sector, where you have really work with elderly people or so, where it could come. I don't believe that it will go into this direction, Switzerland, that there will be a mandate. But certainly interesting question whether companies will take the approach. Also, for example, in the air industry, where if you ask passengers to vaccinate, you will likely also have the people on an aircraft also to be vaccinated, I assume.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's going to depend on the industry, but particularly those in the hospitality sector, whether you're talking about restaurants or travel or hotel, or grocery stores, right, where there's constant interaction with customers. I would imagine that there is certainly a business need to have as many vaccinated as you possibly can. I think that the level of willingness to vaccinate is also going to depend often based on the country that you're in. I have relatives in the US who have gone to their physicians and nurses, and a large proportion, particularly in the medical community, are taking a wait and see approach. Even if they could get the vaccine today, they want to wait to see what actually happens. So I think this is something to watch. It obviously is not going to apply to all of us, but I do think it's something to bear in mind as we move forward. And to your point, Urs, in relatively short time, those vaccines will become available throughout Europe.
Okay, do you want to carry on with your second topic then, Urs?
Yes, absolutely. I think initially the topic was how the day-to-day work landscape has changed. I think we've already addressed that in most parts. Maybe relate the question would be on how you expect the impact to be in the future on the legal department, the work on it, whether that will change, whether you will reduce office space, whether already something is planned in this regard, or whether it's still far away, and so you have not made any plans or thoughts about that. So interested to hear about that.
It's like maybe I can start. So obviously we as a company, we do a lot of research and also surveys of our customers, how they expect the future of work to be, right? And what we see is really the vast majority there says there will be no way back to the old world, right? So And actually some, but this is a minority, think we will stay in this work from home environment. The vast majority of companies we talk to, and that's also our belief, think there will be a hybrid working world, right? So there will be some office-based work, and for some activities it will make sense to get together, but a lot of the work still can be done remotely, right? Similar with business travel. I think there will be some business travel, but I think it's unlikely we will go back to the level before. We just had our worldwide sales kickoff with 6,000 participants. In the past, that was everybody flying into Orlando or Las Vegas or wherever. We had it completely as a virtual environment, right? So I think, again, I don't think all of these events will be virtual, but there will be some mix. And I think this will also impact us as a legal department, right? And I think one very direct impact where I have seen it now is if you think about hiring, right? In the past, we as a legal function were often like, yes, we need to be in the headquarters, close to the decision makers. But what we see now is the leadership teams are virtual teams spread everywhere. And we got used to this working style as well. I realized it for myself when my recruiter recently asked me, what's the location? And my answer was, I don't care, right? Hire wherever you find the talent, which is, by the way, also, I think, a risk for the business location, Switzerland, obviously as a high price location. But I think these are some impacts I would see on our legal departments.
Just to jump in, so has anyone else had a similar hiring policy as that? So you're just not really as interested in where people are from now. You're sort of doing an open invitation to anyone, however qualified, even if they're in a different country, for roles you previously, they would have had to travel in for, or yeah.
Yeah, you usually follow where the talents are. So in that sense, you would sometimes kind of indicate what kind of like cities you're looking to hire, because you know that especially in the M&A and corporate world, you have very specific locations where you would know that probably you'll have the best talents. But I'm recruiting someone actually yesterday. It happened yesterday, and she's based out of London. And actually in the tech industry, I don't know if you heard, but Uber and a certain number of companies, including HP, has actually indicated that their employees could work from home going forward. And we're kind of, we can go to work, but it's not something that's going to be, so in other words, it's going to be something that's going to go after COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting because Swiss Re had started this journey actually before the pandemic. So it was already quite far down the line. We have this concept of own the way you work. So it was quite embedded culturally anyway, and it meant that when the pandemic hit and people all over the world were sent home, it was frankly remarkable. I'm sure a lot of you in the tech industry and other companies which are tech savvy, but it was actually remarkable how operationally the company just continued. To Morel's point, I guess it's definitely true though that there are certain areas where of the world at the moment where there are centers of talent competence, you could say, for certain things, and I can't see that in the short term necessarily changing, but it will be interesting to see. I mean, presumably people have looked at this in the context of kind of offshoring and in service centers and things like that, and these sorts of kind of more cost-driven measures in any event in the past, and the learnings from those sorts of exercises can easily apply in the current situation. So I think it's a bit horses for courses. I mean, it's you know, if you need an M&A lawyer for Meral's example in London, unless you're very lucky in a lower cost jurisdiction, you're not, you know, you're not going to find that kind of person, say, outside of London. So it's interesting. It would be interesting to see how it develops. And I know that our HR department, for example, have kind of accelerated their thinking in and around this space, as I'm sure most HR departments have been.
The point may be actually more on us at the end of the day. For those who are already there, for the teams who are already in the company without proving your talent, you can move. Now you can actually work from anywhere you want, and it could be in any kind of location. So the question would be probably an immediate one for those people who are already there. And then I agree. And I agree with you, Nick, that we are going to wait a little bit to see the impact on the hiring processes, especially when it comes to very specific kind of practices.
I mean, one thing that you do need to bear in mind, of course, and I'm sure that your legal departments are all over this, is that, and your tax departments in particular, is that it can produce some very unwanted outcomes from a tax residency perspective. Permanent establishment issues, those kinds of things. So there is some definite thinking that needs to be done, and actually that was kind of one of the consequences. I mean, at Swiss Re, we identified very early on like 3 kind of core buckets of kind of issues that we were looking at, and that wasn't one of them, right? So we were very focused on the regulatory uncertainty. We were very focused on the contractual piece, and we were very focused on the dispute piece. These are the kind of the three pieces, and we wanted to work with risk management to make sure that we were very coordinated in our responses to regulators and all of that kind of stuff. And but this was I was very interested when we got all of these requests. We had people trapped in wrong countries. I'm sure all of you are the same, and it was just very, very interesting, that particular piece. So that will need to be thought about, I think, going forward.
I think we can obviously have people from the team working from any place in the world. In theory, time zone can be an issue, but this is workable. But at the end of the day, teams meet. Now and then you still need to meet. The virtual is not enough, in particular to build trust. A new hire, you do the recruitment process through Skype or Zoom. The person starts to work, and you didn't have a chance to sit with that person, to spend a bit of time, to have a beer. At the end of the day, we are animals. We need to see, to touch, to smell. The chemistry is not exactly the same through Skype. So I think it will be more a balance between work from home and office time than purely work from home. But we've been pushed in that kind of digital transformation overnight by the pandemic. In my company, when all of this started, they decided to send us home for 2 days to test the IT infrastructure, to make sure that 1,000 people on the network will that will work. And we had a positive case in HQ. So all of a sudden they had to send us home for real for a month or 2. So no test, it's live, and everything worked, someone said, quite easily and naturally. At the time, school were closed, so there was a bit of a challenge with the kids around. But now, as long as the schools are open, I'm happy.
Yeah, I think we all share that feeling, indeed.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we are all social creatures. I think we all like to see our colleague, go for a beer, be part of a big team from time to time that sit around the table, similar to what we're doing now, just to brainstorm. The larger question is how much of that is gonna stay, and how much of that will change. And I think certainly when it comes to business travel at a macro level, not only is this a cost saving for the business in terms of potentially avoiding trips for their employees, but they're also thinking we can do this just as efficiently online. So while obviously business travel has come to complete standstill now, I do think over time some of it is going to come back, but we're probably looking at losing somewhere between 20 to 40% of the pre-pandemic business travel. And that goes, that's for the same reason as companies around the world are now reassessing their property needs. Do you really, if you decide as a company that 50% of your employees or 80% or whatever the number is can work from home, or you work from home 4 days out of the week, you come into the office 1 day a week, you need less commercial real estate. I know certainly within IATA, our objective is to get everybody back to work, because there's this notion that for us going back to normal might also translate to reverting to normalcy for air travel. The two don't necessarily add up, but that's the mentality. But I do suspect that kind of thinking, even within IATA, even within the airline industry, is going to change as a result of the pandemic.
Are you expecting inflation? Are you expecting increase in price in tickets, like we used to know when we were younger?
That's the $1 million question. Right now, if you look at the pricing levels, they're significantly down because no one is traveling. It's a function of supply and demand. Once travel kicks back in, I suspect over the coming years, pricing levels will be relatively low. In pockets where, for a particular origin and destination, you might be paying through the nose, but on average across the world, ticket prices have come down quite significantly.
Mm-hmm.
So we're good for summer holidays.
If your country
for summer, winter, spring, everything at this stage.
If you get your vaccine, right?
If you get your vaccine, exactly.
Well, and that's going to be a big question. Even if you get the vaccine, what are the countries going to do in terms of the border restrictions that are put in place? The data isn't there yet in terms of how effective that vaccine is against the transmission of the virus. Hopefully the data is good. We just don't know that yet. If the data is good, then you could easily see vaccine requirements in lieu of border restrictions, for instance, or quarantine requirements.
So we've been discussing about the change in the work environment and also in some of your businesses. Now for the last 15 minutes and last topic, let's try to focus on your position and the change you could identify in your own role, basically. How do you think that your role as GC will be changing in the future, and how will that have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? We've heard earlier on Andreas telling us that he thought that we were particularly well equipped, especially in Switzerland. Is that a feeling which is kind of single to Andreas and in his pharmaceutical sector? And he was maybe particularly well prepared and organized, or is it a feeling you share and you do consider that you were indeed well prepared, or at least were in a position to react quickly, efficiently, and adequately to the crisis? Or where do you consider you could have been doing better or could have been prepared better, and how, if that is the case, would you prepare for the next crisis?
May I ask an additional question specifically to Andreas, right? Because I found it very interesting that Andreas said he is heading the worldwide COVID task force. I mean, I think this already shows the role of legal being much broader than just mitigating risk and interpreting if this is a force majeure event, right? I mean, that's a big job. How did it come you were leading this, and was there any debate? Is this something for legal, or should this be someone else in the company leading that?
Well, it's a fair question, and the simple answer is there was no debate. We just did it, and then we basically I told the executive committee, look, there's something bubbling up here, and that's what we're doing, and no one objected, which I think is the way these things usually go. Now, we have a bit the specialty and particularity that I also have kind of in my shop, the environment, health and safety and enterprise risk management functions. So in a way, we're well suited to combine of all of these questions. But I'd also say as members of the legal profession, we're used to look at things in a structured way, right? So we see something coming, we analyze it, we think about optionalities, about scenarios, and then we get to a decision point where we say, okay, we do this, if that one arrives, then we do that. And so kind of dealing with problems in a structured way is something we're used to. Other functions have other strengths, and they need to be part of the team. So whatever task force you put in place, you make sure everyone kind of sits on that task force. So you have everyone kind of included, and everyone can contribute the strengths. But I would claim, to the benefit of our profession, that one of our key strengths is like to deal with issues. And it's not really relevant what kind of issues come our way. We have a mode of thinking that we can kind of compartmentalize issues and risks, and then we find people who help us with the expertise, the subject matter expertise. But kind of the strengths we have, and we shouldn't be underestimating ourselves and our function. I think it helps us a lot. Now, you could find people in other functions who would be able to do the same, but I think that's one of the strengths we should put to the table.
I mean, I'd certainly pick up on both those points from Oliver and Andreas. I mean, I think it was an opportunity probably as well for legal departments to step up. In our company, everyone, I was quite proud actually. I felt like everybody in the company stepped up, and I'm sure you do in your companies as well. And so we, to Andreas's point, in our legal department, we felt we needed to step up. Now, we were lucky in the sense that we have an emergency management task force, so we have, which legal is represented on, and it does emergency gameplays, and whether that be cyber or whatever it is, it's as part of the overall risk management framework, and that was able to be invoked. And but there was an opportunity there to coordinate and come through in terms of a consistent approach, particularly at Swiss Re, where we've got 3 business units. So trying to coordinate, particularly as regards contract wording in insurance policies, and also your responses with the regulators. There was definitely a piece there for legal to to step up. Now, actually, it wasn't me personally, but our group chief legal officer and our head of disputes, they actually, with input from the general counsels of the business units, they put together a charter for a defence response task force, and we brought in, to Andreas's point, the relevant, whether that be the business unit CEOs or risk management colleagues in that task force, to bring everyone together so we could try and coordinate some of these responses. So it was an interesting opportunity to step outside perhaps what people traditionally perceive as the legal department, I would say. I'd be interested to know if others had similar experiences to Andreas's and mine.
So I can say here it was the same, and that's why I asked the question, because I wanted to know if this is just a coincidence or a common pattern. But I think here our chief legal officer on a global level took a very active role and the leads with regards to all employee safety, when do we close offices, protocol for reopening, travel policies, and so on. And you had this actually on all levels, right? So also on the business side, creating new programs, business continuity programs, which usually takes months. And we did this within days to support the business. And a lot of these areas where you could argue, is this really a legal job or not? Everybody was in a mode like, we don't care, someone has to do it, we can do it. And like Andrea says, we are good in structuring problems and working on problems we haven't seen before. So we just did it. And many of the lawyers in the organization really stepped up and also had a lot of responsibility and resulting management visibility during that situation.
This is all really interesting, actually, because for a number of years now, we've been hearing how the role of in-house counsel has started to evolve from not just providing a legal function, but to be regarded as trusted business advisors. Do you all think that perhaps the pandemic has maybe escalated that process?
I wouldn't say escalated, but I think it's cemented that process. Would be my view.
It has confirmed it, I agree.
Yeah, I would, to add to that, we've done similar events to this in a number of countries, and the experience is pretty much the same everywhere. In that in-house counsel taking on a not only more senior roles, maybe board level positions, that when they didn't have those previously, seen that a lot in the UK, but also expanded roles as well. So it's not just Switzerland by any means. But I suppose, I mean, that's just what happens when you have a crisis like this. I suppose the legal team is perhaps one of the better people to reach out to. I mean,
the other thing is, as our CLO continuously said, he said it on I recall him saying it on an MD call to however many MDs it was. I mean, it's a legal crisis in a lot of ways. When you look at the contract interpretation or whatever it is, our products come through contracts in our company. So it was very much a legal crisis. So I think there is also the flip side is there's an expectation that legal departments step up as well.
Yeah, definitely.
No pressure, eh?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, you've got to achieve when you've been given that extra responsibility. I mean, it seems like everyone is, definitely. Yeah, I mean, do you guys see the role of the GC expanding even further in the next maybe year or couple of years in response to this, or is this has it found its level, would you say?
Well, from my perspective, there's a clear trajectory. I think there were possibly times, but before our times, lawyers the legal departments would sit at the table and wait for something to come their way, which they could opine on from a legal perspective, and then write a memo and kind of send it back to the person who asked the question. Now, certainly that was before everyone of our times. But I think what we see now is that all of these risk themes get much closer together, and we have this kind of holistic view. We see it with the ethics and compliance topic that has been around for decades now. Then came corporate governance, now comes sustainability, and then on top of that, the crisis management. So I think the world gets more complex, gets more intertwined, and the legal questions pop up everywhere. I mentioned sustainability. We see kind of sustainability developing from a kind of voluntary into a legal requirement. The same being true to some extent with the crisis management. So I think the world for us and our scope of work broadens a lot, and that means we need to think much broader and more holistically, which will have a direct impact on the scope of our role. To the positive, I would say. It doesn't make our lives and our roles easier and more defined, quite the contrary, but it makes it much more interesting, and that's a positive.
And I think as lawyers, we are not afraid of complex situations. We have not necessarily been exposed all day long to this, but this situation of a pandemic raises a lot of questions for the contracts we have or with the employees, what they ask. And at the end of the day, we don't mind exactly who is really in charge. Is it HR? Is it compliance? Is it a legal thing? We just have to show that we can be hands-on and we can handle it. And I think someone said trajectory, or it's a kind of an evolution. And clearly, we step up as a function, and there will be certainly more. This was also an opportunity to show how commercial we can be in assisting the business renegotiating contracts or financial commitments. So I think it's a plus for in-house counsel.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there has been a natural evolution, largely because of the increase in complexities in our day-to-day and in our business lives. Whether that is the pandemic that we're dealing with now, or the influx of privacy regulations and how that impacts your business and what you need to do. So I think the business by and large is seeing an increased value of the legal department. They realize that legal is not there to block things. Legal is there to work with the business, to make deals happen. Sometimes you put on your business hat, sometimes you put on your legal hat. And I think more and more this dual functionality is becoming the norm, as all of our business colleagues are now used to.
What about the size of your in-house legal teams? Is the pandemic having any effect on whether those teams, because of the legal function, is many of you have said it, have had to step up, take on more responsibility? Does that mean the size of your teams also is going to grow? A couple of you mentioned that you're recruiting at the moment.
It might be nice, but it might not be necessarily what will happen. So we may face, probably maybe this depending on company and the industry and so on, but we may face the topic that we get more and more tasks on our plate, which is interesting for all of us, but not necessarily more resources at our disposal. So we have to think about how we prioritize what we get rid of, what we maybe outsource, and what we focus on as an in-house department. So I think the kind of finding out where where the trajectory goes for us as a function, and then kind of getting ourselves organized, for me is a key next step, and to find out, okay, where do we need to focus on, and how do we cater for that, assuming that the resources will not grow to the same extent as the tasks do.
And growing may not be as proportional as the volume of work. Never.
Yeah, that's an age-old problem, isn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah, it's more of an acceleration of an existing problem.
Yeah, exactly. But well, I mean, a lot of the things we've been talking about is pretty much that, isn't it? You know, it's just trends that were there already, but they've just been supercharged.
I mean, if you look at ESG for example, in terms of demand drivers and things like that, I think someone mentioned it a little while ago. I mean, that's if you look at the pandemic and the global protest that ensued as a kind of accelerator of trends, I think that's potentially part of the real challenge for legal departments, because I think the pace of the development of the trends is probably quicker than we've seen before. So, and then if you take topics like ESG, for example, what you're seeing is a bundling of lots of existing topics that legal were advising on in various different forms, and then it kind of gets bundled into one. And then you also see the pace of regulatory change accelerate as a result. And all of a sudden, you know, whereas regulators were talking about things, they're now actually implementing things in our industry in and around, you know, solvency models or capital models or whatever related to climate change, disclosure, all these sorts of topics. So that will be interesting to see how all of us cope and manage with that going forward as well.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone will handle it just fine. I hope. We'll hope. Yeah, I mean, unless anyone had anything to add, I think we can wrap things up there. We were at the 90-minute mark. I mean, yeah, I thought that was a very interesting discussion. Thanks to everyone for coming along and contributing. Yeah, I'll close things out now. So just to reiterate, this has been a Legal 500 online roundtable sponsored by Bear and Cara. If you have any feedback for how we can improve things like this, just reach out to me. If you have any other comments or anything like that at all, please reach out. Yeah, I suppose the only thing I can say in conclusion really is that it does seem like the in-house legal community is stepping up to the plate. So you should all be very proud of yourselves. Coming from a layman like myself, it's very impressive to see how everyone's come up to the plate and managed to protect their staff and their businesses. So yeah, thanks once again to everyone. And this will be available online in the next couple of days or so. I'll give you all a shout when it is so. So yeah, thanks once again, guys, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.